Imagine you're on top of the world, living your best life. Suddenly, everything you know and love is taken from you. What would you do? Today, we're exploring one of the Bible's most incredible stories, the story of Job, a man who faced the hardest test of faith ever recorded. Could you keep trusting God if you lost everything? Let's dive into this amazing journey of courage, patience, and faith. Who was Job, a man known for his faith and kindness? Job was a man who lived long, long ago in a place called Uz. Imagine someone everyone in town knew and admired, not just because he was rich, but because he was kind, generous, and always tried to do what was right. Job had it all. He had a big, happy family with 7 sons and 3 daughters who loved each other, and they often gathered for family feasts filled with laughter, stories, and love. Job also owned thousands of animals: sheep, camels, oxen, and donkeys, more than anyone else around. People saw Job as someone blessed by God in every way, and they admired him not just for what he had, but for the way he lived. Job's kindness, honesty, and devotion to God made him truly special. But here's the twist. Life isn't always easy, even for someone as faithful as Job. What would happen if all that Job had was taken from him? How strong would his faith be then? Job's life was about to change in ways he could never imagine. You're about to hear a story full of heart-stopping moments, surprising tests, and an unbreakable spirit that even angels in heaven were watching. Are you ready to follow Job on this incredible adventure and see just how strong faith can be, even when everything seems lost? Buckle up, because this is where the story truly begins. A challenge in heaven. A test of faith begins. One day, up in the heavens where only angels and God dwell, a surprising conversation began. A conversation about Job. God was proud of Job, knowing that Job's faith was strong and that he lived his life in a way that pleased God. But then Satan appeared with a very different opinion. With a sly grin, Satan challenged God, saying, "Of course Job trusts you. Look at all he has, his family, his wealth, his health. You've given him everything he could ever want. But take it all away, and I bet he'll curse you to your face." Imagine that. Satan was saying Job's love for God wasn't real, that it was only because his life was easy. Now, God knew Job's heart, but to show everyone, including the angels, that Job's faith was real, God allowed Satan to test him. However, God gave one important rule. You can take away what Job has, but you cannot hurt him. And just like that, a powerful and invisible challenge began, a challenge Job knew nothing about. Suddenly, without warning, his life would take a shocking turn. Can you imagine if, in just one day, everything you loved, every person you cared for, and everything you owned were suddenly gone? How would you feel? Would you still trust God? Job's test was about to start, and it would push him to his very limits. This wasn't just any test. It was a test of true faith that even the angels watched with bated breath. Hold on tight. Job's journey is about to get intense, and every twist will leave you wondering, what would I do if I were Job? Disaster strikes. Job loses his wealth and family. Hold on tight, because here comes the part where everything changes for Job in just one single day. Imagine waking up to find that all your favorite toys, games, and even your pet have vanished overnight. Sounds scary, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to Job, but on a much bigger scale. First, messengers came rushing to Job with terrible news. They said Job's animals, his sheep, camels, oxen, and donkeys have been stolen or killed by marauding thieves. Job's heart sank as he realized his hard-earned livestock, which brought him wealth and respect, were all gone. But that was just the beginning. Then more messengers arrived, bringing even worse news. Job's servants have been attacked and killed by enemies, they shouted. Job's heart broke a little more each time he heard the devastating news. His once bustling home, filled with laughter and joy, was now filled with silence and sorrow. But the most heartbreaking moment came when the messengers delivered the worst news of all. Job's beloved children were playing together when a sudden, terrible accident happened. They didn't survive. Job felt like his world was crumbling around him. All the love, the family gatherings, the happy moments, they were all gone in an instant. Can you imagine how Job felt? His whole life, which was full of blessings and happiness, was taken away in one terrifying day. But here's the incredible part. Despite all this unimaginable loss and heartbreak, Job didn't turn away from God. Instead, he fell to the ground, overwhelmed with grief, and said, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." The second test. Job's health was taken away. Satan wasn't finished with Job, not by a long shot. After Job had lost everything he owned, his family, his wealth, his friends, Satan came back to challenge him with an even harsher test. This time, he aimed right at Job himself. In a single day, Job's body was covered in painful, ugly sores from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. Imagine itching and hurting all over, with no relief. No way to sleep or sit comfortably. Job was so miserable, he found himself sitting in a pile of ashes, picking up a broken piece of pottery to scrape his skin, trying anything to ease the pain. Imagine the sadness and loneliness Job felt, sitting there, hurting, with no one to help him. Even his wife, who had also lost everything, looked at him and said, "Why don't you just curse God and die?" Can you imagine hearing those words from someone you love? She'd lost hope, and maybe she couldn't bear to see Job suffer any longer. She thought giving up was the only way. But Job, despite everything, looked back at her and said something powerful. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? Job wasn't saying that he liked being in pain or that he didn't miss his family. He was saying that he trusted God, even when things seemed impossible. Can you imagine that level of faith? Job was in agony, feeling the worst pain of his life. But even when he was hurting and everything seemed lost, he still trusted God. How do you think you would react in such a situation? Job's strength and trust in God, even in the hardest moment, remind us that true faith doesn't just show up in the good times. Sometimes it shines the brightest when things seem darkest. Job's friends arrive, a visit that turned sour. After Job had been sitting in his misery for what felt like forever, 3 of his closest friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, finally came to visit him. They had heard about the disaster that had struck Job, and they set off to comfort him, hoping to ease his pain. For a while they sat with him in silence, sharing his sorrow and feeling his heartbreak. They didn't say a word. Just being there with him in his suffering was their way of showing support. But then, as days passed and the silence grew heavy, something unexpected happened. Instead of offering comfort, they began to question Job. They looked at him and said, "Job, you have to admit, God is just, and if you're suffering, there must be something you did wrong. Maybe you've sinned, or maybe you haven't been faithful enough." Their words cut deep. Instead of lifting Job up, they began to blame him, accusing him of bringing this pain upon himself. Can you imagine how Job must have felt? Like, comment, share, subscribe. Stay tuned for part 2.